Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ultima Final Fantasy, the ultimate Saga podcast. I am your guest host, Greg.
And I'm your other guest host, Steve.
And today we are completing the Final Fantasy Legend Trilogy for Ultima Final Fantasy, so the last of the Final Fantasy Game Boy games not touched on by the podcast. I completed the game, Steve played his usual amount of the game, and we're here to talk about it.
Probably less than normal. I played long enough for Greg to run and get a pizza.
Yeah, that was about as long as he played. So yes, we are talking about Final Fantasy Legend 3, the third Saga game, titled Final Fantasy Legend 3 in the United States. Final Fantasy Legend 3 is a role-playing game developed and published by Square for the Game Boy, the third game of the Saga series, originally released in Japan in 1991 of December. It's in December of 1991. The game was later released in North America a few years later in 1993. And in 2010, an enhanced remake of the game for the Nintendo DS came out in Japan only, featuring three-dimensional graphics, new story elements, and a newly arranged soundtrack.
Ooh.
So, Final Fantasy Legend 3 combines fantasy and sci-fi elements, pretty standard for the Final Fantasy series, with the player assuming the role of Arthur, Curtis, and Gloria, three children who were sent back in time to prevent a massive global flood caused by a being known as the Pure Land Water Entity. They team up with their friend Sharon, who is from the past to them, but the present to the video game players, and recruit many guest companions along their journey to find upgrades for their sweet time machine, the Talon, to save the past, present, and future. So, time travel game.
Yeah.
So, Caleb Craig, also on Ultima Final Fantasy quite a bit, and on Nude Clan and the Puff Puff Hour, the Dragon Quest podcast, he hates time travel plots. Caleb Craig, you are not going to like this one, for many reasons, time travel being one of them, and the game being underwhelming the main reason. This game
but
is...
you have a jump button.
You do have a jump button. This game...
Much like the best JRPG, Super Mario RPG.
Actually, fun fact, we'll get into development, but the guy who made this game later made Super Mario RPG. So if you want a guy who is all about jumping mechanics and JRPGs made by Squaresoft in the mid-early 90s, this your guy right here.
You're selling it pretty hard, actually.
Yeah. So... let's just jump into development history as the next section, and I'll explain what is going on with this game. Alright, so Final Fantasy Legend 3 was the first game to be developed by Square's Osaka department, who later produced the game Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. So the game was translated by Ted Woolsey, who would later translate Mystic Quest in Final Fantasy VI. His goal with the translation of this game was to not repeat the translation mess of previous games, like Final Fantasy IV and the previous Legend games. So his goal was to have a really good translation because he wasn't satisfied with the translations of previous Squaresoft games. The producer, Chihiro Fujioka, his first time producing a video game where he had previously worked exclusively as a video game composer. So a musician, climbing through the ranks of the company, getting his first directing, producing gigs. He would later go on to direct Mystic Quest and Super Mario RPG. So, yeah, he's the guy who really is into jumping mechanics in his RPGs. But yeah, so the main thing with this is that it was done by a completely different development team than the first two Legend games, and that's why it's pretty different. The battles aren't first person where you don't see character sprites anymore. You can actually see the character sprites battling on screen. The leveling up system is a more traditional leveling up system, so it's not just leveling up stats like Final Fantasy II. So you actually have character levels, the jumping mechanic, different composer. So essentially just a completely different team worked on this than the previous two games. And there's a few elements in common, but overall it's a pretty different experience. And so fans of the other Legend games might not be as into this one, or vice versa, where some people have said this is the best RPG of the bunch, but it feels the least unique, is what I've heard from some people about this. But the main gist of it was, Square had a new department that was trying to prove themselves with this game, and their goal was to just have a really awesome game to establish them as an important part of the company. You know, this is Fujioka's first time head in a video game, not just being a composer, so he wanted to prove that he was competent and could make a good game. And did they succeed? I don't know. It was honestly overall kind of an underwhelming experience for me. Ted Woolsey talking about how he wanted the translation to be better than previous Square titles is interesting because I think the translation is noticeably worse in this game than the last two Legend games, where just the phrases are stunted, there's not as much charm to the characters, and I would often forget who people were because they weren't explained very well. Wait, so who is this character? Why are they important? Oh, that person who was like mentioned a long time ago but had no personality? So, honestly, like, you know, the original Game Boy version, which is what we played, translation wasn't like super great. Just the language was stunted, awkward, and had grammatical errors, and the story itself lacked any vibrancy or sense of energy. And that's not to say that Ted Woolsey didn't do a great job with Final Fantasy VI or other things, but this one, it's like, if your goal was to do a better translation job, I didn't really think he succeeded with this one in particular. So apparently the game was difficult for the Osaka department because they had difficulty working with the Game Boy's hardware limitations. The previous team, you know, they'd already done a couple games on the Game Boy, so they were used to it and knew how to push the hardware. That's why Legend 2 looked so much better than Legend 1. But this team had difficulty with the hardware, and so I guess they pushed the limits of the system so hard that the composer for the game, Ryuji Sasai, was told to compose the entire soundtrack using only 3 notes. He could use different octaves, but only 3 notes.
There's not enough notes to really write well in.
Beyond that, the music was also way shorter than the music in the previous title in order to fit the constraints of the cartridge based upon their limited knowledge of how to work with the Game Boy. And so the music in this one definitely feels not as good as the last one. We'll touch on it more in the music section, but that's just how difficult the development was for this game. But Fujioka, musician, decided, hey, I'm going to jump in on this and compose a couple tracks for the game myself, which as a musician, I definitely admire and respect. That, like, even though you got promoted to a more corporate role, you still insisted on doing a couple tunes for the soundtrack. Mm. Like, I feel like if you or I were video game developers and, like, started off as composers and then got our first directing job, I think you or I would probably want to do a couple songs for the soundtrack. If they let us.
Maybe. I mean, I feel like if I were the composer for a game and the director was like, move aside, let me do your job for you, I would resent that a lot.
Right. I guess that. But the thing is, the previous games in the series, or at least the last game, had multiple composers on the soundtrack. And so just, like, working with deadlines and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's possible that... And I think if you just approached it the right way, like, if I, as the, you know, director, went to the musician like, hey, man, I've got this really great idea for a song for the soundtrack, and this is my first time not doing music for a game. Is it cool if I do a song or two? I think, like, the composer, like, so am I getting paid the same amount? Then yeah, whatever. If you want to put on more work for yourself, Mr. Director, go for it. But yeah, so that's the development history. Let's get into the reason I bother playing these games. Let's get into the story.
In a world where the world is being destroyed in the past, present, and future by what appears to be a rebranded bottled water company.
Yeah, so...
A band of rebels. What are they, rebels? Has Coca-Cola taken over the world in this?
All right, so I'll go ahead and... I sent you an email with the notes on this, which admittedly, I copied the notes from the Fandom article on this. But also we have friends who work for Fandom, so I feel less guilty about stealing it from them. and I'm going to reword it in a way, but it's a lengthy story, and I didn't feel like typing it all up myself. But I'm just giving that so you can prepare your jokes, snarkily, Steve.
Right, that is my plan. Are you gonna read it in trailer voice?
No, I'm not going to do trailer guy voice.
You are lazy,
Yes.
says the guy who played the game for about 10 minutes.
Yes, well, I mean, look, I'm going to be super busy composing a film score, so this is my last video game I'm going to play for a while. And
have you considered maybe only using 3 notes for the film score?
I'll talk to the director about that. I'll see how he feels. I'm sure he's going to be super excited about that. It'd be a lot easier. It'd be a super lazy film score, but I could definitely do that.
I just realized I've got a sting button for the drop, so like it'd be much more appropriate if you're using movie trailer voice. In a world.
There you go. I'm not going to use movie trailer voice, though.
Bummer.
Alright, so in the future, the world is being destroyed by the Pure Land water entity, and a band of rebels have gathered to avert this disaster. So the leader of the rebels, Borgen, sends 3 children back in time to the present era in order to save the future. So...
Unhelpful.
Right, so anyway, so the game begins in the present era. It's a time travel game, so you're traveling to different eras. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to refer to it as the present. And you start off with the characters of Arthur, Curtis, and Gloria. They're the children from the future, and their friend Myron are all using a battle simulator, which, you know what a battle simulator is. You all know X-Men. You know what the danger room is. They're in the danger room. So Arthur is a human character, and Curtis and Gloria are mutants. You wouldn't know that from the game because they never call them mutants, but according to the wiki, they're mutants and they're better at being mages than fighters. So the mutant class from the previous games is back, but they don't really let you know. After a rousing battle in the simulator, Myron...
Wait, hold on, jumping back to the simulator a little bit, I'm noticing that it says that it simulates actual battles, including the spoils earned from them. So, like...
Yeah, you get gil and items and EXP.
So they're just like dropping the basic fundamental economic flaw of JRPGs right in front of you, huh? Not even JRPGs, but most RPGs were like, yes, if you kill rats, sometimes they drop gold. In fact, we built a machine that summons rats that you can kill for gold.
I've heard that the idea of monsters dropping gold is an abstraction, where in Final Fantasy XII, monsters don't drop gold, they drop, like, pelts or random body parts that you later can sell at the bazaar in exchange for gold. And that old-school JRPGs just cut out that step because it's boring.
I mean, A, I don't really buy that, and B, if they were to actually include that mechanic, they would have just included that mechanic in old-school JRPGs because that pads the runtime.
That's true. Well, Final Fantasy XII did a lot to pad the runtime by just having obnoxiously slow battles.
So what we're saying is that Monster Hunter Gatherer is the only realistic RPG.
Sure. So anyway, party does the introductory battle, and then Myron leaves, and the remaining 3 party members go to talk to the Elder of Dharm, the city that they start in. And so their goal is to travel to the town of Elin and talk to Kronos about the Talon units. The Talon is the name of their time machine, and in order to use the time machine, they need to get these units scattered across the world in different timelines. So they need to go to these different places in the timeline, gather these parts for the time machine, and upgrade it in order to better use the time machine. In order to go to the past, you need to get a special unit called Past to go to the past. In order to go to the future, you need a special unit called Future to travel in time to the future. In order for your time machine to fly, you need a unit for that. So you need to keep upgrading your time machine. That's a core mechanic of the game. So the first item that Arthur receives is the radar, which lets you know how many units are in the time frame that you're in, but I never used it once because I was playing along with a guide because I wanted to beat this game as quickly as possible. Just to add it to the list because I'm like, all right, I'm about to be stupidly busy with lipstick generation stuff and film score stuff. I want to just knock out this game before the weekly UFF show ends. I have no shame in using a guide because I'm playing these games for story anyway, and I like spoilers, so yeah.
Why not just read the guide instead of playing the game?
It's a good point.
Well, thank you for joining us for Ultima Final Fantasy.
No, I think it's, I don't know, some sort of sense of tradition of at least playing the game through to completion with this show. At least for me and Joe and Caleb. Alright, so the party talks with the Elder at the palace, which is where the time machine is for some reason stored. It's stored inside a palace.
As one does. And
they're joined by the Elder's granddaughter and fourth permanent party member, Sharon. So for most of the game, you have a 4-person party with sometimes a 5th guest character. And Sharon, just a girl from the present with basically no personality because none of the characters have personality, she joins your team, as does your buddy Myron. And so you go and meet Kronos, and he gives Arthur the past unit, so you get to travel back in time to the past. And then you go to the past, and you meet the Elder of Darm, and he's like, hey, I'm looking to build a town somewhere, and like, you should build a town here. And you're like, whoa, time travel, isn't this cool? Except not really. So one of the major flaws with this game is that it's a time travel story that doesn't do anything interesting with time travel. There is no paradoxes, there's no foreseen consequences of what you do in one era affecting another. Like, there's no correlation between what you do. It's more just, it's almost like traveling to different continents and doing adventures there. And then once you're done with that continent, you go to a different one. Like, the time travel mechanic isn't interesting narratively and isn't interesting in terms of gameplay either necessarily. The only interesting mechanic with time travel is that if you get an item in the past, you can't get it in the future. And so it's just kind of annoying when you're collecting items. But that's like the only way it really has an effect on most of the events going on. So as a time travel fan, I was kind of disappointed in it. So you're in the past, and the party travels to the town of Elin, and they find young Kronos, who tells them that his grandma, who is referred to as Granny, went to a nearby cave to rescue a girl named Laura. Not to be confused with Lara Croft, who Square Enix would later buy out. Or perhaps prequel, you never know. And so the party decides to go rescue them. They find Granny pretty early on in the cave, and they tell the party that Lara was taken by Dogra, which is a weird eyeball monster. The party goes, rescues Lara, defeats the eyeball monster. After going through the cave, they find the rover unit, which allows the time machine, the Talon, to move a little bit. It's like, hey, now the time machine can be a car and drive on the ground. And even though it looks like a jet or like a ship of some kind, it's a car. Because you have to slowly pace the upgrade so it doesn't seem like it's too linear. This is a very linear game. It is extremely linear with the way that the time machine slowly gets upgrades, but they're just enough upgrades to block you from going to the interesting places ahead of schedule.
Yeah, womp womp.
So you go back to Elin, and Granny instructs Arthur and the party to return to the present, but to bring Lara to the Elder so she can help protect the present. So she gives Arthur and the party the dive spell, which allows you to dive underwater and explore the ocean. I forgot to mention that earlier you got the float spell, which just allows you to cross the ocean, but not cross mountains. So you can float high enough to cross the ocean, but not high enough to cross mountains. But the dive spell lets you explore underwater world maps.
So what's the advantage of allowing the time machine to travel in ways that the party can already travel? Like, if you can already fly as the party, what's the advantage of allowing the time machine to travel overland?
None, basically.
Oh, okay.
There is very little point to the upgrades to the time machine until the time machine can actually start to cross the water. And so I never bothered to use its exploration mechanics because it was entirely useless. You still run into battles when on the time machine. You move at the same speed. There is no point to using it until it flies, so I don't.
All right. What's the point of using it after it flies, since you can already fly yourself? Just quicker to get back to the time machine once you've accomplished everything you need to on a different continent?
The time machine eventually... So the time machine acts as a hub for the player.
Yeah. Where
eventually you can get an upgrade that adds an inn onto the time machine. You can eventually recruit different people onto the time machine to act as its crew, and they are shopkeepers, so you can buy items from them. So as you get upgrades, it becomes useful just to have an inn on hand at all times that's free.
Okay.
So it does become more useful later, but when you first get it, you're like, this thing sucks.
So it's somewhat mechanically useful, also narratively very stupid.
Oh, yes, this...
Like, hey, we upgraded our own machine, our own vehicle with an equipment store so we can buy better swords.
Yeah.
We could have just bought those better swords, I suppose, but it's better to have a merchant on there.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's...
Capitalism.
Yeah. Capitalism. So underwater, there's not too much going on. There's a town full of people who are slowly turning into monsters, and then when you travel to a different era, they're all monsters. Spoilers.
No.
Also, spoilers for the story in the story section, in case you didn't want spoilers for this game. We're going through it.
So, underwater, there's a town that's gradually turning into monsters. It's not coastal to start with. It starts off underwater.
Yes.
So it's not quite Shadow over Innsmouth.
No, and in the other timeline, it's still underwater, so it's not like, ooh, it used to be on land and now it's underwater. Like, nope, just underwater the whole time, making this time travel thing super interesting, right?
Ooh.
Alright, so, like, thus far into the story, do you think there's any interesting bits of the time travel?
No, not particularly.
Yep.
Just it seems like there's a couple spots that, vary in predictable linear ways when you travel between the two times. Like, people are starting to become monsters, and when you come back later, they are monsters. I guess, sure.
Alright, so you go back to the present, and you take Laura to the Elder, who will keep watch on her, and also make sure that she learns how to be a kick-ass fighter and protects the village. The Elder informs Arthur that Kronos has found something rad. So... you go and meet with Kronos, and he tells Arthur that he found where the future unit is, so you can travel to the future. But
so the past unit allows you to travel to the past and back.
Yes.
Okay.
So you can travel back and forth to the past and back with the past unit, but in order to travel to the future, you need the future unit. How these units are created isn't explained, and why there's one for the past and one for the future and one for flying, and why they're all equivalent, and one unit that allows you to create an inn aboard the... Yeah, this is a quality storytelling from Square with this one. So the ground starts shaking, and Kronos, Arthur, and the party, they go outside to find a structure rising from the water. And Kronos tells the party that one of the 4 water entity monsters, Chaos, is behind this. Final Fantasy fans would know Chaos as the final boss from the first Final Fantasy, so in traditional Final Fantasy fashion, they are bringing in monsters from other games and, like, little nods and callbacks, which makes this very much a Final Fantasy game. That is something that, people were saying, oh, it's not a real Final Fantasy. That is a callback to FF1, so I don't know, if you're considering a lot of the other games to be Final Fantasies, this is basically still one of them. Kronos gives the party a copy of the key to the South Tower, and when they get to the top of the South Tower, they run into Ashura, a villain from the first 2 Legend games, name reused, so once again, callbacks, very Final Fantasy-esque.
Ashura.
You like jazz?
Oops, that was the wrong button.
Close enough for rock and roll. And so the party demands that Ashura give them the units that Ashura stole, and Ashura's like, haha, it's too late. I put them in the in the Castle of Chaos. And you're like, why didn't we just go there first? And like, it's a linear game. You have to go here first before you go there. So you defeat Ashura, and you go underwater to the Castle of Chaos, and you defeat Chaos, and get the future units and the hover units, and then you go to the future. Oh, it's Gojira now.
Yep.
So this is a whole 15 years in the future.
Ooh, the distant future.
The distant future of 15 years.
The distant future, 15 years from now.
The future is basically Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, where it's just a lot of water and some islands. The party goes to Elin and finds Granny on her deathbed, but she gives them the morph spell, which allows you to transform into a monster at will in case you go to a monster town and need to talk to some monsters.
Yeah.
Basically, most of the world has been submerged. Darm is underwater, but you can go there, and they have an underwater city you can hang out in if you go to a cemetery and then find the right gravestone to check, and like secret passage to our underwater city.
Like another underwater city? Because wasn't there already one of those?
There's more underwater cities.
Okay.
Basically, all the places are being submerged. Some of them don't exist, and some are just underwater cities you can explore.
Ooh.
So the party runs into Myron. Remember him? I didn't remember him either when I came across him because he left very little impression on his personality, but he was that guy who was in your party for a little bit at the beginning of the game and then said, I have to stay and protect the village. He's 15 years older and stronger now. And he's like, hey, I can rejoin your party, but I'm even better at fighting than I was before. And so he tells you that there's a city called Viper City, which is super technologically advanced. And in order to get into the city, you need to know their secret password, which is Ericus, or square backwards. Get it? Because Squaresoft? Get it?
I mean, yes, I get it.
Get it? Isn't that hilarious?
Oh,
There you go. So, you go to Viper, and the party joins up with Dion. Remember him? Yeah.
Nope.
So he was a random kid in the town who had, like, one line of dialogue. He's like, I'm a grown-up now, and I can fight now. I'm like, oh, hey, kid character who I definitely don't remember and left no impression on me. It's cool that you're an adult now. So he joins your party.
As one does.
And you go and defeat a boss, and he mentions that we should go see Dr. Pulsar, who's a guy in an undersea shelter. And you meet Dr. Pulsar, and this was honestly the most annoying part of the translation for me, was he gave a really stupidly convoluted plan on going to Pure Land, which is, I don't know, I guess...
Water
Floatland.
bottle implant.
Floatland. There's Floatland, there's Pure Land, so there's all the lands, but it was... Like, the plan he had was, like, use the remote to call the ship, then land here, then get these explosives, then blow up the ship, then I'll build a new ship to come pick you up that looks exactly the same. It was a stupidly convoluted plan where I just didn't understand it and didn't care. It was like, whatever, I'm on this fetch quest, got it. So you go to Floatland, journey across some mountains and valleys, find the MacGuffin that allows you to continue playing the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, this entire section is just a lot of bullshit. Go get this item from this place. So, eventually, you get the bullshit items. Let's see. Anything actually happened in this section? Oh yeah, Dion basically dies. He gets really injured in a battle, and then they take him back to the scientist, and it's like, oh, we have future technology, so I can heal him as long as I have at least one tissue cell from the patient and can revive them back to life. So, yeah, mortality is not really an issue. As long as, like, a single tissue of you survives, they can bring you back. Alright, so the party warps to Pure Land, the Talon malfunctions, and the party can no longer return to the original world, which is really sad because there was totally a point to go back to previous timelines. And by totally was a point, I mean there wasn't. This game is frustrating. It has time travel, but there's no point in going back and forth between the eras. It's like, accomplish your goal, continue the story, and then once you're done with an era, you don't really go back to it.
Maybe their point is to discuss the linearity of time, and that, like, actually changing things through time travel isn't even possible. All you can really do is you can go and observe things and return to your own time, and in fact, all things are set in stone already. You can't prevent the rise of Pure Land and the flooding of the world, because it has already will have happened.
Sure. All right, so you're in the future with Dion, and they decide to split up because you need to have different guest characters. Dion wants to search for Faye. Remember Faye? Yeah, so she's another kid from the present timeline who left zero impression on you. But the game really acts like she left an impression on you. Like, we have to go find Faye. And when the game was like, we have to go find Faye, I'm like, who?
Do we now?
I don't remember this Faye or why she's important. But yeah, so you have to go find Faye, so the party splits up. You lose your guest character. And you come across a village where a bunch of black cat monsters are roaming around. And anyone...
That's racist.
So let's just get through this and we won't be racist anymore.
Right, so you run across the black cat monsters and a bunch of villagers have been turned to stone. And you learn that the monster Fenrir, located in the North Maze, has been turning people to stone. So you find some catnip on a tree.
Like the Fenris wolf is turning people to stone?
Yes.
Okay.
So you find some catnip growing on a tree, and you use the catnip to lull the cat monsters in the North Maze to sleep so you can freely explore the dungeon. You go through the dungeon, and then Fenrir mistakes Arthur for Jupia.
Oh no, Jupia?
Remember Jupia?
Nope.
That's right, me neither. But yeah, apparently we forgot about Jupia this whole time. This game does a really bad job of explaining why certain story aspects are important. It's just like, yeah, you should care about this. But why? Why, game, should I care about this?
Because Jupia.
Right, because Jupia.
Hang on, Jupia. Jupia, come on.
So you defeat Fenrir, and Arthur finds the prison key, which is a key to the prison beneath the North Maze, and that's where you find Faye. Good old Faye.
Hooray.
Hooray. Faye is, I guess, now a nun with magic nun powers.
Of course.
Faye asks where Deanna's gone, and Arthur explains that the party split up. So then Faye tells the party about the Masters, who are otherworldly beings who are trying to rule over the Pure Land. And that in order to defeat the Masters, they need to gather the 4 mystic swords.
They should really remove that drop from this category.
Right? So, you don't actually need the 4 mystic swords to beat the game. They're totally optional. Make the game way easier, and you should get them, but you don't actually need them to defeat the final bosses.
Huh.
So, like, we need them to save the world. I mean, it's more convenient, but you really don't.
It turns out that a judiciously applied regular sword will get the task done.
Faye joins the party, and they decide, hey, we should search for the original 4 members of the Talon, because why not? We're in the future. They should be here. You find a guy named Boozy, who is one of the original members of the crew, and he joins the crew. There was a bunch of stuff with him, and a dramatic scene that wasn't actually dramatic, that isn't worth my time talking about, because it just wasn't very good. Like, he runs across one of the Masters, like, why do you want to rule us? And the Master's like, because I want to. This is dramatic, isn't it? Like, not really. So, let's see.
Is that Guha?
Guha.
All right. So you've defeated Guha.
You get the Mystic Sword Durend. So you get the first of the Mystic Swords. And then you go to Cape Frost and meet Shar, another member of the crew. Shar is basically a red mage, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
So there you go. Final Fantasy callback for you nerds who say it isn't a Final Fantasy game. And they,
I didn't
Shar...
even try to hit it that time. That just my finger slipped.
That happens. Shar sends you on a fest quest to get the tablet from the Southwest Ruins. The tablet is supposedly the key to releasing the people of Pure Land from serving the Masters. So, like, they have free will, and they're able to do things that they want and are totally self-aware, but I guess the tablet is supposedly what will stop them from being slaves, even though a bunch of them are living in rebel societies not being slaves.
See, the trick is the tablet is a basic anarchist book that explains, collective action and unionization and things like that.
There you go. So you get the tablet, trek through the ruins deeper to stop the flow of water of river that blocks travel to the Jorgendur Desert. All right, I'm done talking about this crappy song.
All right, continue.
Yeah, the river's dried up. You give the tablet to Shar, and then tells the party to travel to Talonsburg across the desert while he deciphers what the tablet is and tries to figure out how anarchy works. You cross the desert, but while attempting to cross the desert in the Talon, there's a sandstorm that destroys the ship.
Oh, no.
And then you go to Talonsburg, and they build you a new Talon that is completely identical, that has all the same units and the exact same inside, and the crew members all escaped fine without injury and board the new Talon.
So is this the third identical time travel ship you've gotten?
No, this is the second one.
What was the other ship that you blew up earlier?
No, you blew up the palace that the time travel ship was in, so that the time travel ship could move.
Oh.
Rather than just having it, like, drive out of the building or, like, use the garage door, you blew it up.
No, but with the overly convoluted scheme with, like, the blowing up a vehicle thing. Was that not the Talon?
You blew up something. Oh, no, that was blowing up the palace. That's how the palace got blown up. Because you couldn't just take the time travel machine out of the building it was in. You had to blow up the building. That's the only way to solve that problem. So you get a new time machine that looks exactly the same on the outside and the inside and functions the exact same way with the exact same equipment and the exact same people in it.
That you got from Talonburg, which is presumably a town dedicated entirely to building talons.
Yes. So this entire section seemed redundant.
Well, you killed one of the bad guys, right?
Yeah. So here's the trick with this. I beat this game yesterday, and I'm having trouble remembering this story, and that's why I'm having trouble getting through these notes, because this story is bad.
Fair enough.
Like, that is bad storytelling to have zero consequences to the time machine being blown up. It's just like, oh no, the time machine got wrecked. It's a good thing here's an exact copy of it in every way. Like, it'd be one thing if, like, the new time machine had different features, looked different on the inside.
Well, it says that it has a hover unit now, right?
But you could have added that to your previous time machine.
Oh. But now you get it for sure.
Right.
Optional hover unit now included by default.
Yeah, so that entire section it's just bad storytelling.
Woo.
So then the party travels to Cirrus, the floating city, and here Arthur meets Juba, who wishes to go to the Got region. So you go to King Clamon and requesting a pass to go to the Got region, but he won't give it to you unless you get the legendary sword Excalibur. So you go find Excalibur, the sword in the stone, and you think, oh, Arthur's going to grab Excalibur from the stone, right? But twist, Faye is the chosen one who draws Excalibur from the stone. Your randomized drops are really useful.
Look, the story is kind of tedious. It includes a lot of pointless names that don't matter. It needs as many interruptions as it can get to just really drag it out so we can savor it, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
So, you get Excalibur, but even though Faye can draw the sword, she can't wield it, so she just gives it to Arthur anyway, which that was totally a worthwhile element of the story, of having someone other than Arthur draw the sword so he can wield it anyway.
Sounds about right.
And so you bring the sword to King Clamon, who's like, oh, well, you have proven your worth through this arbitrary task. I will give you the pass where you can now go into the underworld.
Is that what Got is?
Yes.
Okay. Dun dun dun.
That's an apt description of this game story.
Straight to the underworld.
When you're about to go to the underworld, you come across Dion, and he's like, hey, tag out, Faye, go do something else. I'm going to be the new guest character. So you go through the underworld, go on some adventures there. Not too much happens in the underworld. It's kind of tedious and boring.
Well, color me surprised.
Oh yeah, Dion basically dies during some misadventures. Oh yeah, Dion had a bomb installed in his chest the last time he was healed.
That's the disadvantage of the healing thing, is that it plants bombs in you?
No, the scientist put a bomb in him in case he needed to sacrifice himself and save the party. So Dion sacrificed himself.
Okay, yeah, that seems like a reasonable medical decision to make.
Yeah, so Dion sacrifices himself to save the party on one of the random fetch quest missions, and then a new party member joins right after Dion dies in order to conveniently replace the guest party slot. So Borgin, the guy who sent you back in time in the first place, he joins the party. Remember him? Borgin?
Yeah, actually vaguely, because he's like the first name that comes up. I
guess. Actually I do remember him as a character. So yeah, basically you gather the remaining members of the crew, do some side quests, get the Mystic Swords, and then you're like, okay, we're gonna go to Mount Got, and we're gonna go to Zagor's castle to defeat Zagor. Remember him?
Zagor's a huge Metallica fan.
He is. So you travel through Zagor's castle and you meet Saul. Remember him? Yeah, so Saul is God, who I think only got mentioned like a couple of scenes before this, and he's like, I have taken Zagor's soul into my body, so you need to kill me so that Zagor can be defeated. So, very Final Fantasy, you kill God.
Wait, these notes here also say that Saul created the Talon?
Yes, God also created the original airship, which got destroyed.
Right, so, like, you don't, I guess, I don't know, we're getting into some very, like, you don't need God anymore because mankind has built all of that stuff anyway.
Right. So, you start to kill God, but then Zagor takes over God's body, and you have to defeat Zagor
God's
/ God.
as it were.
Yes, God bod. And then you do, and then God thanks you for killing him.
I see you've reached the end of his Dark Materials already.
I haven't, and I'm bummed out because I am not going to be reading that while I'm working on the film score. I'm going to be focusing all my spare time that I'm not working on lipstick stuff or spending time with my wife on that. So I'm putting his Dark Materials on hold, which is a bummer because I'm digging the hell out of that book, pun intended. Alright, so because God is created, Pure Land is going to be destroyed, which means all the people living there are going to die in a cataclysm. But
Stupid RNG.
But anyway, it doesn't matter because you'll be saving the people of the past and present. So what if the people in future Pure Land die? Whatever.
Take that, Pure Land nerds.
So yeah, that entire future Pure Land gets destroyed, and so does the Talon. It gets destroyed in the process. And then the party returns to Viper City, and Dr. Belsky, the guy who revived Dion earlier, is like, oh, he blew up? Do you have a single tissue cell? Oh, cool, I brought him back to life. Dion's back, yay!
Oh, that happens twice now?
Yes.
Hey, I fixed it. Oh no.
Man, this brings back a lot of memories.
Oh no, everything's in a different order than it was before, though. Where's my sting button?
Alright, so you bring back Dion and Jupia. Remember him? So Jupia, I guess, is your dad. And he's like, hey you, I never met you during this journey, but you seem like a pretty cool guy and you saved the world. What's your name? My name's Arthur. Oh, that's really sweet. I'm gonna name my kid Arthur. And then Arthur's like, that's a great idea. You should totally do that. Oh, and I forgot to mention this, but the family from FF Legend 2 made a cameo in this game, where Indiana Jones' dad gives you an item that allows you to help get a mystic sword, and then the family disappears, and then someone says, oh, that family looks familiar. Alright, but Arthur then gets the decision to stay in the future with his dad or to travel back in time to the present where he started, and he decides, I want to go back to the present because reasons.
As one does. Well, like, the main character still grew up in the present, right?
Right. So he decides to go back to the present, and they go back to the present and meet up with Myron, and he's like, hey man, want to do some battle simulator? And you're like, hell yeah, the end. Steve, what do you think of that story?
I stopped paying attention about halfway through so I could fix my mandatory Metallica drop. So we should be good now. Perfect.
Yeah, so that was a bad story.
I feel like there was just like a million moving parts and none of them seemed to really matter.
Yeah, that's the problem with it.
Like, I'm not even entirely sure. So, like, what? Zagor entered into God, and by killing God and Zagor, you prevented the world from flooding?
Yes.
And the Coca-Cola bottling company from ruling everything? What was all the stuff prior to that about?
So, the real bare bones of it is 4-person party from the present era, although 3 of them are from the future, to make it confusing.
Right.
So 4 friends, childhood friends, go on an adventure to save the future. They go to the past to help get some upgrades for their time machine in order to go to the future. They go to the future, they defeat the thing that is flooding the different timelines, and therefore save everybody. That's the story in a nutshell. But they add so much other plot elements, and like most of them just do not have any good payoff. And I think that's the issue. Like, this is the first game in the series where the characters all start off with default names, but ironically, Final Fantasy Legend 2, so they would give random dialogue for your characters. So like your random third party member would have lines of dialogue. That dialogue in FF Legend 2, which was kind of randomized, gave the characters more personality than they have in this game. Which you'd think with named characters that they'd be better at. But the characters basically have no personality. You'd think that having one character be actually from the present timeline, the granddaughter of the Elder, would help differentiate her in terms of how she interacted with the others. Nope, none of that. It's
So I feel like the less convoluted version of this entire plot is party goes back to the quote-unquote present and just spends 15 years in the training simulator so they can defeat the big bad evil guy right when he conquers the world, instead of a whole bunch of time travel, just like one time travel. Seems a lot more efficient.
So you mean the android saga from Dragon Ball? Where someone comes from the future, like, some bad dudes are going to destroy the planet, work out for a bunch of years.
Yeah, pretty much.
So...
Can I get an amen?
Yeah, pretty much. So, yeah, story-wise, I was not very impressed with this one. Based upon me describing the other stories to you and what you played of Final Fantasy II and Soul of Rebirth, what do you think about this story in comparison?
I mean, it seems pretty bad. I feel like the other ones, to a little extent, were excuses to travel between the set pieces, right? They were like, now we go to Cyberpunk World because it's cool, it's a new place to go, yeah.
The worlds aren't very different in this game.
Yeah,
is the
it
problem.
seems like this one is just like you have, now we go to Past World, which was like 30 years ago.
It's
now
the same, but with more trees.
Now we go to Present World, which is like now. Now we go to Future World, which is like 15 years from now, which, like, especially if you think of this in the terms of in context of the 90s, the big difference between 30 years ago and 15 years in the future in the 90s wasn't that impressive. Like right now, if you go back 30 years, you lose the internet. That's kind of cool. You go forward 30 years, global warming has melted us all. So at least you got like a post-apocalyptic thing.
Yeah, but here's where it's nice and boring. Like, as far as the future, the future is the most interesting of the time frames to visit because for some reason a lot of the world is covered in ice for no explained reason, and a lot of the world has sunken underwater. So I don't know. Just the set pieces aren't interesting. The different worlds you go to aren't as diverse or exciting. To bring up another time travel game you played, Chrono Trigger.
I mean,
which I know you're not a big fan of.
It's generous to say I played it.
But you got to the future at least, so you got to experience 3 different timelines.
Yeah.
And compare 600 AD to 1000 AD in Chrono Trigger versus the past in this and the present in this. There's a lot more differences, and actually, there's actual narrative consequences to time travel.
Right.
Where even though you're not a big JRPG fan, you could probably announce that Chrono Trigger was doing at least more interesting things with time travel than this game.
Right. They tried to make something happen.
Yeah, so this story, pretty underwhelming. I imagine in the remake it's probably significantly better. Add an additional characterization, explaining things more. It might be good in the remake, but with the version I played, it's convoluted, and without characters I'm really attached to, like, the bare bones story doesn't work without great characters. Like, if something has really interesting lore, it can sometimes make up for lack of interesting characters. To a degree. I tend to need interesting characters, but if the lore is really good, I at least view the story as somewhat worthwhile. This one, the lore isn't even very good. It's just, yeah, the story is bad.
Mm-hmm.
But let's move on to gameplay.
Gameplay.
Drivel spouted by intentional, or is it just a horrible mistake?
It's most of this game a horrible mistake, let's be honest.
Gameplay, it's a JRPG, but it has some differences from the last Final Fantasy Legend game that I want to touch on. So, still a turn-based JRPG, party attacks, monsters, etc., etc. But it's no longer first person. You can actually see the party members during battle.
Which I wonder how much that bit them. Like, if they were running into technical limitations, having those extra sprites on screen during the battles, I wonder how that affected things.
That might have been one of the big issues. Maybe they had to cut a ton from the story and things that made sense because they decided, we have the characters in battle. But, I mean, yeah, it does look kind of cool. So, you get to actually see the party members during battles. For most of the game, you have a 4-person party, but you will usually have a 5th guest party member. So 5-person party, so was also probably a technical limitation having that many party members.
Party members. They also had the monsters all on screen separately.
Yes.
Like, there weren't stacks of monsters, which meant that, like, if you're fighting 6 monsters, you've got 6 monster sprites on screen.
Yeah, because in the previous Legend games, they would have stacks of monsters. So they're like, there's 7 of these dudes, but you only see 1 on screen at a time. So the fact that they didn't stack the monsters, had all the extra sprites on screen, yeah, we're probably figuring out what was pushing the game to its limits. The game has a traditional level up system, so unlike Final Fantasy II and the previous Legend games where you just leveled up your character's stats, this is more straightforward. You get a certain amount of EXP, you get to the next level. Straightforward, normal RPG leveling system, so if you were frustrated with the leveling system in the previous games,
good news.
Good news. They fixed it. The ability to turn into a monster with the meat system returns in this game, so you can eat meat and upgrade your characters into monsters. Either humans or mutants can turn into monsters. Anyone can turn into a monster. But you're like, I missed the robots from the last name. Good news. If you defeat a robot, you can get random parts that you can install into your body and turn you into a robot.
Huzzah!
So there is a monster leveling system and a robot leveling system, and I did not mess with either because I didn't care. But it's in the game. Like mentioned earlier, 2 of your characters are humans, 2 are mutants, and I did not realize this until I was reading the wiki afterwards. Arthur and Sharon are natural warriors, while Curtis and Gloria are natural mages. Curtis is naturally better with black magic, and Gloria is naturally better with white magic. But
it sounded like you were phrasing something very poorly when you said Curtis is naturally better with black magic. Just that phrasing makes it seem like naturally Curtis is better with black magic.
Oh yeah, naturally.
Naturally.
But good news.
Let me hit that prejudice drop again.
So let's just get through this and we won't be racist anymore.
Right. Good news. For people who are really annoyed about the inns charging you based upon the amount of damage you've received, that's still in the game. They didn't get rid of everything. So the more you need to heal, the more the inn is going to charge you.
Hooray!
But also, good news, the encounter rate is lower than the previous games. So, you're not walking 2 steps and then getting into a battle. This game also introduces a jumping mechanic, so you can jump over townspeople and jump over holes and other obstacles, which actually leads to some pretty good dungeon exploration. I would say the dungeons in this game are actually probably the best in the Legend trilogy, where the actual video game part of this game is actually good.
Right.
So it's a better battle system, it's a better leveling system, and while the world map isn't interesting, the individual dungeons you explore and the puzzle solving is actually much better than the previous 2 games.
The fact that jump moves you forward exactly 2 squares, and if you try to turn your character, they walk a step, forces you to spend some time thinking about how you're traversing a dungeon, because there's, holes and traps and things like that you have to avoid.
Yeah, so I mean, it does actually add a good amount of sincere fun to the gameplay, which, hey, gameplay being fun, that's weird, right?
That is unusual for these JRPGs.
So,
can you at least play some Blitzball or something to add the tedium back in?
So, as mentioned earlier, the time machine acts as your hub, so you can slowly obtain upgrades for the time machine. We touched on that in the story. If you zoned out during that section,
we don't blame you.
Yeah, we don't blame you. You can get additional crew members on the time machine who will sell you stuff. You can get an upgrade that creates an inn, upgrades that allow the time machine to move more freely throughout the world. So there are upgrades you can get. A nice feature about this game, you can run away from any random battle. So unlike the last game where there was a dungeon that wouldn't allow you to run away from battles, any battle you can run away from with 100% success.
Any battle?
Any random battle, not a boss battle. But you can retry any battle. So if you lose to the final boss like I did, they're like, hey, do you want to retry that? Yeah. And you can retry any battle. There's an immediate retry function, which is very convenient. When characters are knocked out in a battle, after the battle, you don't have to use a Phoenix down or something to revive them. They have 1 HP. The equipment screen in this game is absolutely terrible. When you first don't have any equipment on your characters, it'll say, this is where a shield goes, this is where a sword goes, this is where a helmet goes. And then once you put that item on the character, it'll just say the name of the item. So it'll say dragon, or iron or steel or whatnot. And so you think, no big deal, right? The problem is, all of the helmets, armor, and shields have the same name. And so if you get a new piece of armor, you don't remember which of those item slots is your armor slot.
Are they not in some sensible order? Like, top one is helmet, second
No,
one
they
is...
aren't.
Oh.
Top one is weapon, then it's like, it's chaos and terrible. So, there's no descriptions for any of the items, so you don't know whether or not what you're equipping is better or not.
Well, what happens if you try to equip something wrong?
They won't let you.
Oh, so it's not like you accidentally break things.
Right, but it makes it take much longer than it should to equip a new item.
Yeah.
As far as side content, there are side quests to get the ultimate weapons. I did that because I was following a guide, and it made the end of the game much easier.
Huzzah! I mean, that's sort of the point of ultimate weapons, right?
Yeah, but yeah, that's all the comments I really have on gameplay. Do you have anything that you noticed, Steve?
Aside from what I already said about jumping mechanics, making, for some interesting dungeon design, I ran into some kind of weird glitch, so I played it for about 10 minutes. Greg gave me a save file that was, all his characters all the way leveled up, and I loaded that up and said, no, I should watch the first cutscene, and so I started the game over, and suddenly started the game with characters with maxed out stats, but then didn't realize that, you don't start with the jump mechanic, so I got confused at the first dungeon. And that's how I saved Christmas. Thank you.
Well, let's move on to music and graphic design. So, the majority of the music was composed by Ryuji Sasai, but as mentioned earlier, Chihiro Fujioka, the game's producer, also contributed music to the game. Once again, the composer was told to use only 3 notes due to the graphical limitations of making sure we had the party members on the screen. So the music is better than it deserves to be based upon the limitations, but still maybe the weakest in the series. I would say that some of the compositions are actually pretty enjoyable and pretty impressive given the limitations.
Dude, this version of Hot Cross Buns slaps.
Oh, yeah. But, visually, the game is very similar to the previous 2 Legend games, and similar to the video game Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which was developed by the exact same team, so same composer, same director-producer, same graphic department, and apparently what they did was they took the sprites from this game and just updated them a little bit to make them look better and be on a Super Nintendo, add color to them, and that's how they made Mystic Quest, was taking this game and updating them. Mystic Quest also had a jumping mechanic, and had the characters fighting with them facing the enemy, so the player characters towards the screen and the enemies farther away from the screen. So same general look and feel for the game, and same translator, like the same team. Basically, Mystic Quest is a sequel to this, essentially, which Joe and Caleb are playing, but not this one, because that's a real Final Fantasy, but this one isn't.
Right.
But so the art style retains the style of the first 4 Final Fantasy games and the first 2 Legend games. All of them have a very similar style to them. I would say the game is not a noticeable improvement graphics-wise from the previous game, aside from seeing the characters in battle. So
the continent seemed pretty blocky again in this one,
yeah,
too.
so this seemed in many ways a step down graphically. So yeah, I think that ultimately the music was not as good in this one, given the limitations, but I think the music was still competent. Rock and roll! Yeah, I mean, I still enjoyed the music, but
you only need 3 chords, man, right?
Yeah, but it wasn't as enjoyable as the previous game, and I would say the music got a lot more awkward throughout the game where it was used, where like you would be doing a scene, and because you could move through the dialogue boxes very quickly, the music would change very quickly, and so like the tone of the scene would like jump back and forth very quickly and just didn't flow very well because I'm able to read at a level beyond a first grader. So yeah, the music didn't necessarily flow very well in this game. But yeah, I didn't get any listener questions or read any other reviews, so let's just hop into the legacy of this game. So, the game received mostly positive reviews and has a 71% score on game rankings. 7 out of 10 from IGN, 32 out of 40 from Electronic Gaming Monthly, 3.35 out of 5 from Nintendo Power, so the consensus is good, not great.
What year was this in? In like
93?
93, okay. Long enough ago that video game rankings, actually had some spread to them.
Right.
Now, if this had come out in like 2007 with a 71%, that means it is the worst game ever.
Yep. But, so basically everyone thought this game was okay. I couldn't find any sales information on it. Obviously the game did well enough where the Saga series continued and still continues. So, like, the Saga series didn't stop with this game, and they eventually did a DS remake for it in 2011. So, obviously it did enough for them to bother to do a remake. In the West, in particular, though, the game isn't talked about nearly as much as Legend 2. I've seen some YouTubers review the entire series, and all of them are like, yeah, this one is maybe, like, the most fun traditional RPG, but it doesn't have the same charm as the other Legend games. And, yeah, it's weird. This one, like...
Is this the last one that was called Final Fantasy Legend?
Yes.
Okay.
And then after that, it's all Saga, baby.
All right, so we don't have to play any more of them.
No. I might play Romancing Saga eventually because they straight up used Final Fantasy IV sprites and modified them for that game. And then after that, they actually started to not just crib stuff from the Final Fantasy series and just create original content. But I think I might want to play that one just because of where it stands historically and like the straight up stealing they did on that one. But yeah, so this is the end of us going through the Final Fantasy Legend games. But obviously, this game, was so good, quote unquote, that it led to 2 branching sequels. Romancing Saga on the Super Nintendo, and Final Fantasy Mystic Quest on the Super Nintendo.
Ooh, but there's no actual, plot connection between any of these games, is there?
There's no plot connection between any of the Saga games or with this and Mystic Quest, but, I mean, if you look at it, Mystic Quest is one game that continues the legacy of the Saga series, and so is the next Saga game. So, the fact that this game was effectively able to branch off into 2 different sequels shows that it had some level of success. Like, if this was an abject failure, you wouldn't do 2 different sequels for a system with better hardware.
Right. So this game is like the final Rhapsody in Flames album, as before they split off into 2 different bands with the same name.
Yeah, pretty much. But, yeah, overall... So, one of the things that I mentioned to Joe and Caleb when talking about this game is that... Or rather, talk about Mystic Quest. So Mystic Quest, for Steve who doesn't know, is a Super Nintendo game that came out that was supposed to introduce Western players to JRPGs.
Because they'd already missed Final Fantasy, or?
Because Final Fantasy wasn't selling super well, and so they tried to make a game that would appeal to Americans. So they made it way easier because Americans are dumb.
Yeah.
They added jumping because they thought Americans would like jumping in their games, and made a simpler story. So... It was like a very streamlined Final Fantasy where like a small child could pick it up and play it. And that one got criticized because it's too easy and the story wasn't as good. And so I was curious, and you can only control 2 characters at a time. So it was a very simplified version of an RPG. And so with this game, I was curious because it still had the jumping mechanic, but it had a more complex story, had more characters you can control, had a higher difficulty level. So I thought, would this game cancel out a lot of the criticisms people had of Mystic Quest? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
This is actually...
It's more complicated but worse story.
Yeah, and actually, Mystic Quest is a much better game than this. I had a lot of fun playing Mystic Quest. Mystic Quest was simple, but it had charm. The locations in Mystic Quest were more interesting, the music was better, and the story was more engaging in Mystic Quest. So, yeah, Mystic Quest. Better game than this. But... now comes the part of the show where we do our rankings.
1, 3, 2.
So you're saying 1 is the best?
No, from bottom to top, 1, 3, 2.
So you're saying so your ranking is at the bottom Final Fantasy Legend 1.
Yeah.
Then Final Fantasy Legend 3.
Yeah.
Then Final Fantasy Legend 2.
Yep.
And then didn't you have Final Fantasy 2 at the top?
Oh, I forgot about Final Fantasy 2.
And Final Fantasy 2 Soul of Rebirth.
Oh yeah, I forgot. All right, what order did I rank them in last time?
I don't remember.
Put this one next to either at the bottom or next to the bottom. Listen to the previous episode. This one's second to last.
So yeah, this one did not really impress you?
No, but it had jumping.
Yeah, it did have jumping. So I'm actually going to incorporate Mystic Quest into my rankings because I didn't realize when I started this how similar it was to Mystic Quest and the fact that it's the same development team and use the same sprites, so this is a really convoluted list.
Yep, convoluted list of ostensibly unrelated games. I'm really far away from my mic, so you guys can't hear me.
So at the bottom, I'm going to put this game because I pretty much value story more than anything else.
Uh-huh.
So this is at the bottom, and then after that, I'd probably put Legend 2, and then probably Legend 1, then Mystic Quest, just because Mystic Quest the story wasn't as good as Legend 1, but it was really charming, and that charm factor helped rise it pretty high for me. Then I'd put Soul of Rebirth above that, and then Final Fantasy 2 at the top of my Saga, Mystic Quest, Legend, whatever this side series is ranking of what many consider to be the worst of Final Fantasy, because it's Mystic Quest and Final Fantasy 2 connected in this weird, convoluted way.
It's time you did some explaining.
I don't know, I just felt like
I feel like I did enough explaining.
I had to hit the hot take button for something. They don't call you Hot Take Troyan for nothing.
That's true, but
Except in this episode where they do. They call you Hot Take Troyan for nothing.
It's time you did some explaining.
But yeah, this is quite possibly our last guest appearance on Ultima Final Fantasy, Steve.
Oh, no. Well, thanks for having us, and we apologize for everything.
Yeah, we apologize for everything. I might do Romance and Saga at some point. Probably just the first one, and I'm probably going to play it on emulator because, yes, I could get it on PS2, but I want to play it with the old school sprites. I want them to straight up steal stuff from the Final Fantasy games when I'm playing it. So if I do play it, I want to play it on emulator just to get that Super Nintendo experience.
Doing crimes.
I mean, whatever. It wasn't commercially released in the United States on Super Nintendo. And the PlayStation 2 version is out of print, so I can't actively give the company money for it. And whatever, I bought like Final Fantasy 2 like 3 times. They can handle me playing this game that wasn't commercially released. As far as if I'd reviewed that for UFF, I'm not sure if Joe and Caleb would want that. Yeah, I think this is the end of our guest appearance on Ultima Final Fantasy. Thank you so much for having us. Steve, where can people find us on the internet?
They can find us at lipstickgeneration.com and Lipstick Generation on most other platforms.
All right. Well, that is our episode, and as always, enjoy the grind.
Sorry.
Yep. All right, that's our show. Bye, Internet.
Bye.
Ultima Final Fantasy is a podcast